Welcome everyone to session 3 of the 16th Asia Pacific Sociological Association Conference. This session is broadcasted live via the Facebook page APSA Conference 2021 as seen on the bottom of your screens. Again, the Facebook page is APSA Conference 2021. This year's conference follows the theme Solidarity and Collaboration Among Sociologists in the Asia Pacific towards resilience and inclusive development. We would like you to contribute to the sociological discussions here at APSA 2021. Please be guided of the house rules for today's session. All guests and participants are automatically muted upon entry. The ceremony will be recorded for documentation purposes. For panelists, please keep your video off and your microphone muted, especially if it is not your turn to speak. For panelists as well, we will warn you when you only have 3 minutes left in your presentation. For the attendees, please send your questions and specify who it is addressed to the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen so that the session chairs can note this and raise it during our open forum. For those watching through the Facebook live stream, please send your questions through the live stream comment box. Let us now begin the webinar with a welcome message from the President of the Asia Pacific Sociological Association, Dr. Emma Porio.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to the second day of the 16th APSA conference. In 1996, the Philippine Sociological Society and the Philippine Social Science Council organized the first founding conference with the founding president, John Western, the legendary sociologist from Queensland University. Since then, APSA has been fortunate to have been led by distinguished sociologists from Australia, Japan, Thailand, and the Philippines. And we had conferences in the cities of Southeast and East Asia. In the future, I hope we will have conferences in the cities of South Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, and Pacific Asia. In 2012, the Department of Sociology, Institute of Philippine Culture of the Ateneo de Manila, and the Philippine Sociological Society organized the 11th APSA conference with leading sociologists from North America, from Taiwan, from Vietnam, from Thailand, from Australia, and you can see that in our program of abstract. So, in 2020, APSA President Miwako Husoda asked me if we can organize a webinar, and we decided to partner with 5 universities: Sydney University, Shisha University, Chulalongkorn, University of the Philippines, Visayas, and the Ateneo de Manila, and the 2 research divisions of the International Sociological Association, the medical sociology headed by Professor Miwako, and RC46, which I happen to head also. In this year, Kyoto University and Visayas State University joined the fold. Also, this year, despite our teaching online courses and many virtual engagements, we managed to pull it off. I would like to thank, our conference organizers and committee and all the support that we have gotten in order to pull this through. So I always say we social scientists must work together and collaborate. So if you notice, the theme of our conference is collaboration and solidarity among Asian sociologists, interrogating climate and inclusive development. So the past 2 years, the APSA conference themes have focused on what I call the twin crisis of our time: the climate crisis and the social inequality crisis, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and the consequences of the community lockdown. So these challenges have spurred creative and proactive responses among social and physical scientists, artists, in collaboration with the universities, local national governments, CSOs, and CBOs. So we hope that in APSA, we continually create spaces for creative and collaborative impetus and for our own theorizing, empiricizing, and analyzing, albeit in new and dynamic forms, the interrogation of what I call our existential crossroads of our time, brought about by this crisis and challenges. So on behalf of the Asia Pacific Sociological Association officers, advisors, and organizing committee, I would like to welcome you, and I hope we will have a very dynamic discussion. Yesterday, we had very interesting discussions of COVID-19 and health inequality, social scientists from South Asia, from North America, from Southeast Asia and Australia, on really looking at the historical and structural underpinnings of inequalities, of the pandemic, or what we call it syndemic. And so I hope today also we will have a very good discussion on climate, health, and equity. I would also like to thank our ADMO president, Roberto Yap, also project holder of the Coastal Cities at Risk, our Ateneo de Manila School of Social Sciences Dean, our chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, Professor Canoday, I forgot to mention Dean Saloma of the School of Social Science. And of course, yesterday, I really would like to thank Michael Burawoy, who gave us a very good welcome introductions. And I think we will play his welcome message again. And then also I'd like to thank Melanie Robertson for his support of our engagements here. So I really would like that our gathering today, albeit virtually, and also under convenement, is really, I would always say, our gathering is always premised on trust and collegiality, that by working together, we can contribute to a more collaborative and more united future. Thank you very much. Joy, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Porio. We now move on to our welcoming messages. We will hear first from the Ateneo de Manila University President, Father Roberto C. Yap, SJ, who is also the project holder of the Coastal Cities at Risk in the Philippines, Investing in Climate and Disaster Resilience Project.
On behalf of Ateneo de Manila University, I welcome you to the 16th Asia Pacific Sociological Association Conference. The theme of the 2021 conference, Solidarity and Collaboration Among Sociologists in Asia Pacific Towards Resilience and Inclusive Development, emphasizes the need for sociologists to consolidate their knowledge and expertise in order to contribute even more significantly to finding solutions to the world's most intractable problems. However, the complexity of these challenges, the global pandemic, climate change, gender equity, poverty and hunger, and so much more, demands that sociologists also collaborate with others beyond their discipline, with researchers and practitioners in science and technology, business and economics, governance and policy, and all other sectors of society. As the topics of this year's conference attest, this multidisciplinary collaboration is a distinctive strength of the Asia Pacific Sociological Association. As sociologists, your research and insights in human social relationships and institutions are critical to the transformation and development of our society into one that is resilient and inclusive. May the additional knowledge and engagements that you will gain in this conference deepen your commitment and inspire you to continue your meaningful work for the advancement of humanity. I wish you a productive and enjoyable conference.
Thank you for that, Father Bobby. Now we will hear from Dr. Melanie Robertson, Senior Program Specialist of the Climate Change Program of the International Development Research Center in Canada, or IDRC.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Melanie Robertson, and I'm a Senior Program Specialist at IDRC, the International Development Research Center. For people who don't know IDRC, we are part of Canada's foreign affairs and development efforts. We fund and support high-quality research all around the world. We share knowledge with researchers and policy makers to inform actions, and we also mobilize partnerships all around the world. First, I would like to thank Dr. Emma Porio for the invitation to say a few welcoming remarks today for the session, Climate Change, Equity, and Community Resilience. Combating climate change and inequalities are the main drivers behind our work at IDRC. And these guide our vision towards a more sustainable and inclusive world. Research is vital towards developing evidence-based solutions. I think everybody in the room will agree with this. However, for research to be successful, it must be needs-driven, solution-oriented, inclusive, and consider absolutely marginalized and vulnerable groups. Gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, age, and physical ability are all factors that influence how individuals experience climate change and adapt to its impacts. Although women, indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities, and people living in precarity contribute the least to climate change in terms of emissions, they suffer the most from its negative impacts. For climate action to be really effective, it must be based on research that help us to understand the interrelated climatic, environmental, cultural, social, economic, political factors that exacerbate the different impacts of climate change. We also need to really improve our understanding of how climate action can support social equity and enable everyone to increase their resilience and become positive agents of transformation. This is what brings you here today. I wish you a very great session, and thank you again, Emma, for this opportunity to say a few words on behalf of IDRC. This is an honor. Thank you.
Now, we will hear from Dr. Michael Burawoy, APSA advisor from the University of California, Berkeley.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Emma, Dr. Porio, for your invitation to offer my remote welcome to the participants in your conference. I speak to you from Boston, USA, and these, we all know, all over the world are very difficult times, times in which the future of the planet itself is in balance, times when sociology has a crucial role to play, bringing hope by imagining alternative futures. But as sociologists, we have to understand both utopian possibilities, but also the constraints on those possibilities. Indeed, sociology is suspended between utopian and anti-utopian thinking. In these times, we need to draw on all the resources at our command, not least on the inspiration from the great sociologists of the past. In recent years, I've been inspired by the life and work of W.E.B. Du Bois, undoubtedly the greatest American sociologist, also, in my view, the greatest public sociologist to have walked the planet. Born in 1868, just 3 years after the end of the US Civil War, he died in 1963 at the age of 96 in Ghana, self-exiled from the US. Why have we not heard more about him? Indeed. Although educated in the historically Black Fisk University, although he was the first Black PhD from Harvard, although he spent years at the University of Berlin, nonetheless, he was systematically excluded from established white universities and mainstream sociology, taking up a position at the Black Atlanta University. He developed his own Atlanta School of Sociology that preceded the Chicago School by 20 years, conducting research every bit as meticulous as the Chicagoans. Until recently, his enormous achievements were denied, but today we are increasingly turning to them. After 13 years of mounting frustration and racism, Du Bois left Atlanta University to found the NAACP, that is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the famous civil rights organization, and became editor of its magazine, The Crisis, for 25 years, from 1910 to 1934. He showed how effective a resolute public sociology can be. He was not only an editor, but he continued to be a scholar, a poet, a novelist, and a dramatist. There were no limits to the ways he communicated his original sociology. Through most of his life, he saw the solution to social problems as a form of democratic socialism. But that itself, he always insisted, depended on first solving the race problem. At the turn of the 20th century, he proclaimed the color line as defining the future. This led him to being a leading Pan-Africanist. It led him to see how the US imperialism was thwarting the freedom of the darker races throughout the world. And his ideas stretched beyond Africa to Asia too. After World War II, he was a leader of the international peace movement, which put him on the wrong side of the Cold War, at least on the wrong side as far as the US state was concerned. He was indicted by the US state as an undeclared foreign agent, but the case had ultimately to be thrown out. He was embraced by the Soviet Union and China as a celebrated opponent of the US state and a determined advocate of civil rights. He lived the last years of his long life in self-exile in newly independent Ghana at the invitation of President Kwame Nkrumah. US mainstream sociology made every effort to bury his extraordinary contributions, in particular his reinterpretation of US history, an reinterpretation that centered the role of African Americans, even as they faced assaults on their existence. US sociology disparaged his genius because it didn't want to be linked to his radical politics, politics that are now inspiring a rethinking of the past and the present, and indeed the future. Today, we need such global figures to inspire reconnections across the face of our devastated planet, reconnections that will attempt to save humanity from the disasters it has created. The Asian Pacific Sociological Association is undertaking the important task of building an international community to address such entangled global problems as climate change, pandemics, and inequality. Congratulations to Dr. Porio and her colleagues for mounting this conference despite everything. Thank you very much.
So again, we would like to thank Dr. Michael Buraway, Dr. Melanie Robertson, and Father Bobby Yap for their support in the Asia-Pacific Sociological Association. Let us now formally move to session 3 of the conference. Session 3 is on climate change, equity, and community resilience. Dr. Emma Porio, APSA President and Professor of Sociology from the Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines, will moderate the session together with Dr. Cheyenne Vadanaputi, Director of the Regional Center for Social Science and Sustainable Development and Faculty of Social Sciences at Chiang Mai University, Thailand. May I now hand over the floor to Dr. Emma and Dr. Cheyenne.
Is Dr. Cheyenne in now? Joy, can you spotlight on him, please? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the third session of the 16th APSA conference on climate, equity, and community resilience. Yesterday, we had an excellent discussion of COVID pandemic, health and inequality, and the historical structural ramifications of our concepts, methods, and applications to the conditions of inequity and inequality in our time. It was great exchange of ideas from North America, from South Asia, from Southeast Asia, and Pacific Asia. So this morning, I would like to welcome Professor Cheyenne of Chiang Mai. And Joy, do we have Professor Surichai? Professor Surichai is now in Paris attending the session on the Commission on Southeast Asia. So can you spotlight him if he's in this room?
They're both not yet here.
Okay, all right. So I would like to say that we are fortunate to have the support of the social scientists from the Asia Pacific region. So for example, Professor Dang An, president of the Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, emailed me this morning and said, or he also emailed me several days ago that, he would have preferred to comment on the first set. And I said to him, my aim really is just to highlight the work of climate change of the Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, because I know they have done that. And also that's the same for the other people in the panel. So for example, we have our panel, economist Maria from Ateneo de Manila, Mahalia Rabago, and Gay de Fiesta from the Philippines. And then we have a presentation also from the Women's Alliance of Climate Change of Lower Northern Thailand, and also from Climate Watch Thailand, and also the Asia Climate Change Consortium. We also have, the panelists. We have Professor Dang An, and we have Professor Brooke Williamson from La Trobe University. And I hope, Koichi Hasegawa will show up today. He is my colleague at the ISA on Environment and Society. And then most of all, I'd like to thank, Antonia Yolo Loizaga, the president of the National Resilience Council, and my co-investigator, along with Jessica Brasilia in the Coastal Cities at Risk. So I would like to privilege the Coastal Cities at Risk for, the next 3 minutes, because we are co-organizing this. So I would like to share a few, can you please allow me to share screen, Patty? Okay, so I would like to just show a few slides from our work. Can you see it? Hello? Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can, Dr. Corio.
Okay. So the Coastal Cities at Risk in the Philippines, investing in climate and disaster resilience, has been organizing this APSA webinars since last year. So I will just show to you that CCARPH is first a consortium of Ateneo de Manila University and the Scientific Organization of Manila Observatory, which Tony Yolo used to be the executive director, and the National Resilience Council, the private sector partner, which Tony is now president. It's also a consortium of cities that we're trying to make resilient. And you can see here, the Naga City, the climate disaster risk assessment vis-a-vis flooding. And you can see here that on the upper picture, we have Mayor Legacion with the president of Ateneo de Naga, and with the Resilience Council and other scientists presenting their output to the local government unit and to the private sector. And then in the lower part, you have the map that basically, I hope Dr. De Fiesta will show later, which basically looked at the levels of vulnerability of the different barangays. And so really, our aim is what I call institutionalizing the resilience agenda, because most of our governments are really very reactive, to typhoons, floods, and they just react. They don't really prepare, and they do, but not systematically prepare and prevent, the extreme event, how to respond more proactively and systematically, that people will be out of harm's way when a hazard comes in. So we do this through trans-reaction research, tools, partnerships, networks, and coalition. As you can see here, so we have the partnership in the National Resilience Council, the national government, and then at the local, we have partnership with universities, local governments, and then at the regional and the global. So I would just want to, because as researchers, I really believe that we have to go transdisciplinary now. I always tell my my staff that we have to embed transdisciplinarity, intersectionality, and systems thinking into our way of doing research. And we basically subscribe to the three principles, the TDR principles of co-generation of knowledge with stakeholders, co-creation of capacities, the scientists and practitioners, co-ownership. And if you do that, all the partners will own and be benefited by it. And on our right hand, you can see here the different levels of knowledge production and application that you have. I will not go into detail because you'll have a copy of this. And also, I want to emphasize that knowledge production should lead into application and innovations on the ground, as well as conceptually and methodologically. I will not go into that, but basically, we as I said earlier, we're just as good as our science and our technology that should support decision making, and it should support people on the ground, and to appreciate science, appreciate data, and how it will make their decision making more informed. So when we say risk informed, resilience driven planning and development investments, we do all that. I also want to introduce Melanie, whom you heard a while ago, was basically asking me, what is the innovation that we are, that we're having in the CICAR? And I said, we basically interrogate very well incremental adaptation and transformational adaptation. So if you want to innovate, then there are two kinds. So when you say incremental adaptation, it really just make the system work a little bit more effectively. But when you say transformative adaptation, it transforms the systems as well as its relationship with other systems. We also innovated in terms of looking at art as a strategic pathway for risk and resilience communication. I was really impressed with my artist colleagues when Tony and I gave them the findings of the coastal cities at risk 1, 5 years. And they just translated that into 20 panels of exhibits. And I was thinking to myself, what a very effective way. And that's why we emphasize what we say, we social scientists must produce actionable and translatable science to the level of practitioners and professionals. We also, we think that mobilizing gender and resilience, and Jessica Brasilia and Gay Di Fiesta did this very well in Iloilo City. And then in Arete, which is the artist hub of Ateneo, innovation hub of the Ateneo Manila, we promoted community resilience toolkit in terms of the community-based partners. We also created youth champions for resilience. And we also looked at gardens, in the pandemic, we have food gardens, and the fine arts faculty translated that with their students in terms looking at gardens as a space for resistance and collaboration in a time of climate crisis. And also the artistic director of Arete, who is a sociologist as well, he summarized the findings of the coastal cities at risk into 10-minute video. And she also wrote a play and a drama called Azul, which basically looks at the contradictions of growth and prosperity. Okay, so and then I would like to basically conclude by saying, this is our productions, and you can see there all the, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes the whole society to produce and to collaborate and to improve our conditions. So in the center here, you have the coastal, you can get the link, the Coastal Cities at Risk Resilience Toolkit for Philippine Cities. I will not go into that, but you can get the, Joy can put the link in the chat and you can click on it. So in closing, I will just say, I like this. I gave this closing also to the deepening system scores of the National Resilience Council. I like this African proverb which says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, we must go and work together. Thank you very much. Can I now stop share? With that, I would like to start the session. I'm very thankful to to all our session presenters, Dr. C, Dr. Rabago, Dr. De Fiesta, and Wapiporn and Nonom for participating in this conference. And then we have our reactors later. I've introduced them. So can we have Justin C? Justin C is newly minted PhD and a postdoctoral fellow at Canberra University. And she used to work with us in the Coastal Cities at Risk One with Tony. And in fact, our Master of Disaster Risk and Resilience, which recently has been ranked as one of the best in Far East Asia by the France-based rating agency Ido Universal, Justine and I did hold the survey, like that's okay. Okay, Justine? Yeah. Hi, Justine.
Do I share my screen?
Yeah. Can you I think you have to remove your screen, Joy. Yeah.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much, Professor Emma Porio, and to the organizing committee of APSA 2021 for this opportunity to share my research in the Philippines. So my name is Justin. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Canberra and former member, as Dr. Porio said, of the Coastal Cities at Risk project of the Ateneo de Manila and Manila Observatory. So my short presentation this morning is focused on this concept of disaster justice, which in the literature looks into the differential impacts, not only of climate change per se, but also of the interventions that are meant to help communities adapt to climate change. Disaster justice is found at the confluence of environmental, climate, and social justice. It's concerned with this interplay between distributive and procedural dimensions of justice. However, a key research gap in the literature is that a great deal of research is focusing on distributive justice alone. And thus, procedural justice, or the questions of who is involved in decision-making, how are people involved, and to what extent are they involved, needs to be taken a little bit more into consideration. One exception is Brina Holland's notion of procedural justice in terms of political capability. She draws from David Schlossberg, Martha Nussbaum, and Amartya Sen's capabilities framework, and argues that vulnerable groups should be given this political capability to shape adaptation decisions. But what is this political capability? I don't think that has quite been explicitly explained in Holland's paper. So that's why I want to draw upon this and expand this notion of political capability and argue that there should be three meta capabilities or three smaller capabilities that would comprise this bigger notion of political capability. So these three meta capabilities are necessary to facilitate these conditions under which vulnerable groups can have this capability to influence decision-making in climate change adaptation. And there are three. I argue that first, voice, or the ability to raise your concerns and be recognized. Second, participation, or the ability to participate meaningfully and to engage with powerful stakeholders. And third, empowerment, or the ability to be informed and capacitated with knowledge and skills. I argue that we need these three so that we could achieve procedurally just climate change adaptation. I looked at San Isidro resettlement site in Iloilo City as a case study. When I did my fieldwork here in 2018, there were a number of NGOs implementing resettlement as a climate change adaptation strategy in the community. First is the Homeless People's Federation of the Philippines, or from now on I'll call Homeless People's Federation, which has warmly welcomed me to hosted me during my fieldwork. Now, their relocatees were supported by the Homeless People's Federation. They applied for a small loan, just small 3%, to finance the construction of their houses. The other NGOs that I looked at, but I'm going to call them NGO 2, 3, and 4, offered free prefabricated housing units in exchange for sweat equity. So my research methodology is to explore procedural justice using surveys. So we looked at the perceptions of procedural justice, administered the household survey from April to June in the language of Hiligaynon. We stratified the sample according to population size of each of the 4 NGOs, and then we triangulated these surveys with 25 semi-structured interviews conducted with government officials, NGO staffs, community leaders, and members of the community. So here are my key research findings. First, in terms of voice. The survey respondents reported significant differences in the degree to which they felt that they were able to voice out their thoughts and concerns. You will see in the table in front of you, the first column, that's Homeless People Federation, the results from there. You will see that those resettled, they felt more able to express their voices compared to other resettlers. And so we tried to understand why is this so? And based on the interviews, 2 major themes emanated. First, public forums. Their members participate in monthly forums where they can express and share their issues and concerns with one another. But second, they also have this community-to-community sharing because it's a nationwide federation. So they have these meetings, discussions, and workshops with other federations, other community groups where they share their ideas and experiences. And that has really helped them find this voice to express their issues and concerns. Second, capabilities, participation. Based on the table in front of you, you will see that out of the 4 NGOs, once again, those resettled by Homeless People's Federation reported being more involved in the planning of their resettlement compared to the others. 2 major themes were recording from the interviews when asked why are they involved. First, participation in the entire resettlement process. Homeless People's Federation involves all of its residents in every stage of the resettlement project, from planning to design, to the procurement of materials, to the housing construction. Second, participation in governance. Their members take part as steering committee members and have signed a number of memorandum of agreements with the local city government, City of Iloilo, as partners in different projects. Finally, another key findings would go with the empowerment. Respondents under Homeless People Federation expressed greater satisfaction about the extent to which they have been capacitated. They were involved in the planning of their resettlement. Respondents from Homeless People Federation attended several workshops and training sessions to learn about housing design, about legislation, policies about housing. They were taught how to do financial estimates. They were taught how to do procurement of materials and introduced to the basic stages of housing construction. They were even involved in several livelihood programs. So in conclusion, the participation of a wide range of stakeholders, especially the poor and vulnerable groups, it's often promoted in several policy responses to climate change. However, participation is often more talked about than practiced. So participation alone is not enough to guarantee procedural justice. This presentation argues that we can learn from the experience of Homeless People's Federation in Iloilo and work to build people's 3 meta capabilities: voice, participation, and empowerment. A combination of the 3 can help advance procedural justice and enable vulnerable groups to renegotiate political outcomes to achieve policies, strategies, and programs that can ultimately benefit them. That's my presentation, and looking forward to your questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Justine. Now, I think, Patty, can you flash the... Okay, our next speaker is Mahalea Rabago of the Ateneo de Manila University. She's the president of the Philippine Economic Society, as well as I'm very grateful to her for basically creating the Environment, Energy, and Disasters Lab at the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development. She's a highly accomplished economist who have presented and collaborated with studies here and abroad with many other economists. Thank you very much. Maha, can you start sharing your screen, please?
Yes. Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you see it? Okay. Do you see my screen? Just checking.
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Emma Porio, and to the organizing committee of APSA 2021 for the opportunity to present our paper titled Extreme Weather Events and Households' Welfare in the Formal and Informal Sector. So this is a collaborative work with colleagues from the Department of Economics and Manila Observatory, whose names you see on the screen. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of coastal cities at risk in the Philippines investing in climate and resilience project funded by IDRC in Canada. Okay, now, situated in the tropics and the Pacific, the Philippines is vulnerable to extreme weather events such as super typhoons, storm surges, intense flooding, among others. In 2019 and 2020, the World Risk Report has placed the country as number 9 among the most exposed countries in the world. Okay, so disasters caused by natural hazards have become a pressing development concern because they can negate development gains and push any household into poverty and even exacerbate inequality. Before we go into investigating the impact of these disasters to formal and informal sector, let me just define them. Formal sector, these are the sectors that is subject to taxation and regulatory law, while the informal sector is largely outside of it. It's implicitly illegal. Informality aggravates the socioeconomic costs incurred by households during disasters because of lack of access to health insurance and formal financial instruments to cope with risk. Disasters can increase the vulnerability of informal households to remain informal, while also increasing the risk that formal households will fall in formality. With climatic changes that are expected to result in shifting precipitation patterns and potentially fewer but slightly stronger tropical cyclones affecting the country, understanding the impact of extreme weather events on the welfare or well-being of the formal and informal sector is crucial for the appropriate design of policy instrument and social protection. When we say extreme weather events in this particular study, we mean extreme rainfall days, so that our specific objective is to assess and differentiate the impact of extreme rainfall days on the welfare of the formal and informal sectors of the economy using a nationally representative household survey data from the Philippine Statistics Authority. So this is the Family Income and Expenditure Survey and the Labor Force Survey that is merged by the PSA. Now, in the data set, we utilize satellite-derived daily rainfall from the Tropical Rainfall Measuring Mission multi-satellite precipitation analysis. So we define a extreme rainfall day when the rainfall exceeds the 95th percentile of daily rainfall from the 1998 to 2018 period that we use. Each year, we distinguish municipalities as experiencing normal or extreme rainfall. A municipality is tagged under extreme when the number of extreme rainfall days for the year exceeds the 75th percentile of the annual number of extreme rainfall days across the study period. Now, who are the households in the informal sector and how big is it? Note that the PSA, or the Philippine Statistics Authority, does not issue official statistical counts of formal and informal households. However, it defines the informal sector as those households unincorporated enterprise. So we use this definition as identifying the households in the data set. As you can see here, the proportion of the informal household has decreased from 2006 to 2015 from 42% to 36%. Informal households are also mostly in the rural areas and most of them are poor. So this table highlights the intersection of these characteristics. And if we look at expenditure and income, which we will be using as indicator of their well-being, both of these indicators are lower among households experiencing extreme rainfall relative to their counterpart who are in the informal sector. Now, we go to the formal analysis of looking at the impact of this extreme rainfall day on the well-being of the two households. The basic approach in examining the difference in their welfare would be the inclusion of a dummy variable equal to 1 if the household is classified as informal and then apply the ordinary list squares. However, this leads to a biased estimate due to the assumption that informality is exogenously determined when in fact it can be potentially endogenous. What does this term mean? It means that households belonging to the informal sector may have systematically different characteristics and chose to be in the informal sector due to its expected benefits for being so, thereby influencing their income. So to address this endogeneity or the reverse causation and selectivity bias in the data, we estimate a switching regression model by using maximum likelihood methods. So it's just, you have here the household choosing between the formal and informal sector depending on the different characteristics. So this equation, this is just our welfare equation or the well-being equation. The X and Z, these are the determinants or the factors influencing this variable or the income or expenditure. And note here that this D here are our variable for disaster up to 3 years, because it's established in the literature that disaster experience even several years after would affect the well-being. And the vector of household characteristics that I mentioned earlier includes sex, age, square of age, just to account for nonlinear effects, marital status, educational attainment of the households, and household size. And for what factors that would determine whether they'll be in the formal and informal sector, it would also include being in either urban and rural municipality or being poor and non-poor. Let me show you the results. We pulled the data and estimate using two methods. We still did the OLS, but like I said, it might be biased. And then we did the full information maximum likelihood estimation. So this is the result of the OLS. We find that being in the informal sector relative to formal sector decreases expenditure here by around 7%, holding other things constant. Then, but as I said, this might be biased, no? So we did the full information maximum likelihood estimate. So we first look at what influenced households to be informal. So the results shows that being poor significantly affects the likelihood that households will be informal, and also being considered as urban inversely affects the likelihood that households will be informal. Now, to answer the question, what's the impact on the well-being? No, so the estimates, the full information maximum likelihood estimate, show that extreme rainfall adversely affects household welfare, using here the expenditure as the indicator of well-being. Extreme rainfall days significantly lower expenditure households in the formal and informal sectors by 16 and 10.6% respectively. When income is used as indicator of well-being, the negative impact is slightly bigger at 7.2% for formal and 11.9% for the informal households. Now, what's interesting also is the coefficient of the 3-year lag extreme variable for the extreme number of rainfall days. They are all negative and significant, with the magnitude getting smaller the earlier the experience of extreme rainfall. Now we graph this estimates for the variable extreme rainfall days, and this is what we have. The dotted line is for the formal, and the solid line is for the informal. Here, the slope of this line can be interpreted as the speed of recovery. So we interpret this to mean that the formal sector, though it is more negative, they recover faster than the informal sector. So from these results, households in the formal sector has larger income and has more to lose than households in the informal sector. However, the adverse impact to the informal households may be irreversible given their weak capability to recover and their limited ability to smooth out consumption even during days with normal rainfall. Another interesting result that we see is to look at the actual and counterfactual comparisons, meaning what would have happened if the informal households go to the formal households. So that comparison is here in between cells A and C. Households who are in the informal sector have income lower by almost 2,000 a year compared to a counterfactual case had they chose the formal sector. And for comparing cells B and D here, where the counterfactual of formal household is had they choose the informal sector. The households in the formal sector would have income lower by about 52,000 had they choose to be in the informal sector. Some concluding remarks. Households, regardless of which sector they belong, as we've seen from the results, reels from the negative effects of experiencing extreme rainfall from 3 years ago up to a year ago. Weak capability to recover and the limited ability to smooth out consumption even during days with normal rainfall makes extreme weather events adversely potent for the welfare of the informal households. Targeted social protection coverage to households near the poverty line can help soften the blow of weather shocks. So this may include improving informal sector access to opportunities for smoothing consumption and education and awareness campaign regarding the impact of disasters. Thank you very much, and I hope to hear comments later.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rabago, for the excellent presentation. Can we now hear from Dr. Gay De Fiesta from University of the Philippines, Visayas? Dr. De Fiesta was the former academic vice president of UPV. And also, I'm very happy that Dr. Gay De Fiesta is the only one who understands what risk as a function of HEVC mean in the Climate Change Commission. So I'm very happy, Gay, that we are together and we can assert for a more comprehensive, interactive, integrative, convergent pathways to resilience in the Climate Change Commission. Okay, Doc Gay? Yeah. You can share your screen. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Okay, they're sharing my screen already.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Gay De Fiesta, and I'll be presenting our research prospects for equity and resilience, lessons from social vulnerability analysis. My co-authors are Alan Moscoso and Leia Araneta. Next, please. As an introduction, we know that the effects of climate change is felt worldwide, but its impacts vary across countries, communities, and households. These differential impacts exacerbate poverty and inequality that can undermine resilience and sustainable development. Understanding social vulnerabilities of communities and social groups is crucial in developing appropriate policy interventions that ensure equitable resilience. Next, please. We define social vulnerability as social vulnerability shows the socioeconomic and political context in which hazards occur. It is a pre-existing condition and an inherent characteristic. For example, being female can be a social vulnerability in highly patriarchal societies. It is driven by social, political, historical, economic processes and structures that weakens a community's ability to prevent human suffering and economic losses in disaster events. Social vulnerability is highly related to resilience and equity. next please, sorry. uh, Socially vulnerable groups bear the brunt of climate change impacts. For example, women and girls in highly patriarchal societies suffer more during disasters. Study shows that there is higher incidence of injuries and deaths among women and girls in major disaster events, such as the Indian tsunami, for example. And because of inherent vulnerability, such as poverty, lack of access to basic needs, coping is difficult and recovery is longer for these groups or individuals. For example, in oil spill stricken communities here in Western Visayas in 2007 and 2006 and 2007, I think, women were marginalized in relief and damage compensation because their contribution in the fishery was considered less significant. So recovery was quite difficult for them at that time. So social vulnerability weakens resilience to disasters, and understanding such vulnerabilities is crucial in resiliency and equity. For resiliency and equity. Next, please. So our study was conducted in Iloilo City, Central Philippines in 2020. This is part of the climate and disaster risk assessment of the study, which is a component of the Coastal Cities at Risk Philippines, headed by Dr. Porio. It included all the 180 communities or barangays in the city. We used the Philippine Statistical Association census data of 2015 and 2017 barangay profile and other relevant data from the local government unit. It covered 18 variables relating to age, sex, population density, dependency, housing, informal settling, disability, education, and water access. We used factor analysis using principal components method for index construction and tested it for specificity and significance. Next, please. So just the background on Iloilo City, it is located in Central Philippines and has a population of almost 500,000 as of last year. There are 180 barangays or communities within the city, and it has a land area of 78.34 square kilometers. It is a coastal city. The social vulnerability study result shows that the important factors that contribute to the social vulnerability of the barangays in the city are dependency, access to safe water, gender, literacy, housing materials, and house ownership. This explains 75.42% of the variation in the data. Next, please. We classified social vulnerability in Iloilo City according to low, moderate, and high based on standard deviations. And we can see that majority in Iloilo City are moderately vulnerable. Next, please. We integrated social vulnerability assessment with hazard and exposure data of the top 5 communities prone to flooding, storm surge, and drought, and we see these results. So we see how social vulnerability influence risk. For example, being a person with disability in flood-prone areas will have persons with disability in flood-prone areas will have difficulty when evacuation is necessary. Or, for example, women in drought-prone areas will be burdened, highly burdened during dry season because of lack of access to water. Next, please. So some insights from the study. Social vulnerability analysis shows the important factors that contribute to inherent vulnerability in communities and how this influence risks in disaster situations, as you have seen in the results. And integrating social vulnerability analysis with hazards and exposure data allows identification of the population and risks. We were able to, in our study, we were able to identify the groups where they are located and approximate the number of the people that will be affected. Knowing what contributes to social vulnerability, areas and aspects that need interventions are easily distinguished and addressed properly. So you can see that, for example, in areas where water access is almost 100%, then you see which area you can already put your intervention. Next, please. So If you look at social vulnerability study, it's comprehensive. The social vulnerability assessment allows the inclusion of multiple indicators, and it can include even non-income data, such as, for example, access to resources or lack of access to water or dependency. There you can focus to a specific variable of interest. For example, in Iloilo, we know that water is a problem, so therefore we included water access. It can be general to very, it allows general to very specific analysis. We got granular results, which make detailed analysis possible, which means that results can be broken down into pieces. We can go from general to specific, from the description of levels of vulnerability to looking at a specific variable that influence social vulnerability. Next, please. So we recommend that social vulnerability analysis should be included in development plans to address inherent vulnerabilities. It should be used as an input in designing policy interventions that promote resiliency. It can also be utilized to understand and address inequality and sources of inequality. And lastly, government institutions should invest in creating and maintaining a database in social vulnerability indicators to make all this possible. Thank you very much. And next, please. I just want to acknowledge, next, please, SICAR PH, ADMU, and partner institutions, NRC, Manila Observatory, IDRC, of course, Dr. Emma Porio for her leadership, inspiration, and of course, inputs to our study, the Iloilo City Local Government Unit, and of course, University of the Philippines, Visayas. Thank you very much and good morning.
Thank you very much, Gay. That's really very great. I mean, I used that yesterday. I used your study as an illustration to the RMOs and to the NDRMC Council LGUs, how to go about, measuring community resilience and, the levels of vulnerability and the like. So thank you very much. Of course, Jack was there who helped me. Okay, thank you, Gay. Now we will hear from Con Wapiporn of the Women's Alliance for Climate Justice in Lower Thailand. And she will be accompanied by Con Wanon Parmicol of Climate Watch Thailand and the Asian Climate Change Consortium. Okay, Con Wapiporn and Con Wanon, go ahead. Yeah.
สวัสดีค่ะขอบคุณที่ให้โอกาสดิฉันมาเล่าเรื่องราวการเปลี่ยนแปลงของสภาพอากาศที่เกิดขึ้นกับตัวดิฉันนะคะดิฉันนางวภิพรธรรมมาค่ะเป็นเกษตรกรชาวสวนมะม่วงที่ปลูกข้าวไว้กินเองอาศัยอยู่ที่ตำบลชมพูอำเภอน้ำปรางจังหวัดพิษณุโลกจากเครือข่ายผู้หญิงเรียกร้องความเป็นธรรมในการจัดการโลกร้อนภาคเหนือตอนล่างค่ะ
My name is Wanan Parmicol. I'll do the translation, but we'll keep to the key points. Yeah. So thank you very much, Dr. Emma and the organizer. The current speaker's name is Wapiporn Thamma. She is a farmer in the lower northern part of Thailand, and she is also part of the Women's Alliance for Climate Justice. ต่อเลยค่ะ
ค่ะจากช่วง10 ปีที่ผ่านมานะคะแดดร้อนแรงมากนะคะทำให้ทำงานกลางแจ้งได้น้อยลงนะคะจากอากาศที่ร้อนมากนะคะเราต้องหยุดพักบ่อยนะคะแล้วก็พักเร็วขึ้นเมื่อก่อนออกจากบ้านไปทำงาน7:30 แล้วก็ทำได้จนถึงเที่ยงเอาข้าวไปกินที่สวนเลยแล้วก็กลับบ้านอีกทีตอนเย็น5:00 นะคะแต่ปัจจุบันไปเช้าทำงานได้ถึง11:30ต้องกลับมาบ้านอาบน้ำเปลี่ยนเสื้อผ้าแล้วก็กินข้าวเที่ยงที่บ้านแล้วก็ออกไปทำงานอีกประมาณบ่าย 2:00 จนถึง6:00 ทำให้กลับถึงบ้านมืดค่ำแล้วก็หุงหาอาหารได้ช้าลงกว่าเดิมนะคะจากแดดที่ร้อนแรงมากนะคะเห็นถึงความแรงที่เกิดขึ้นอย่างผิดปกติจาก 10-15 ปีแต่ก่อนเรารู้ว่าฝนจะมาช่วงไหนแล้วเราจะต้องตัดแต่งกิ่งมะม่วง แล้วก็ทำนาในเดือนไหนนะคะแต่เดี๋ยวนี้เหมือนจะผิดฤดูกาลไปหมดฝนทิ้งช่วงนานบางปีแล้งเร็วแล้วก็แล้งนานมากนะคะเรารู้ด้วยตัวเราเองแม้ไม่ได้เป็นนักวิทยาศาสตร์ก็ตามจากการที่รัฐมนตรีสิ่งแวดล้อมของไทยนะคะให้สัมภาษณ์ขณะที่อยู่ลาสโกนะคะช่วงการประชุมขอบ26ว่าเกษตรกรเราของไทยเราไม่รู้ไม่เข้าใจเรื่องโลกร้อนดิฉันคิดว่าไม่จริงนะคะเพราะกลุ่มเครือข่ายผู้หญิงของเราแล้วก็ดิฉันเองแล้วก็เกษตรกรคนอื่นๆรู้เรื่องนี้มาเป็นเวลานานหลายปีแล้วแปลค่ะ
She started with giving the characteristics of the changes and which has been abnormal in terms of climate-induced heat and drought. The heat has been very, very strong, and she observed the changes to the heat in a daily basis. It used in the past 10 to 15 years ago, she used to be working in the farm starting from 7:30 and then taking her lunch and had lunch in the field, in the rice field, and then work straight in the field until 5 o'clock, then getting back home. But as at the moment, it has been changed. She started working in the field much earlier, like 6 o'clock, and then have to come back home for lunch because the heat was so strong, and then get back to the farm again, and then coming back home quite late, like 6 to 7 o'clock in the evening. And that has also made her her responsibility and her role in the caring work within the household a bit delayed, like cooking for the families, and those are a bit delayed. And also she has observed that the abnormality of heat and drought, especially in terms of the rainfall, it has been unpredictable these days. When she is planning to cut her mango trees, she used to know when to cut it, the exact time. But as of now, she has to plan for it in advance. And one last thing that she mentioned, she's mentioning about the Minister of Natural Resources and Environment. When the minister was giving an interview while he was in Glasgow for COP26, he was saying that Thai farmers are not aware and do not understand about climate change. She was saying that it is not true because we are living with the climate system. So farmers, the women group, and also all those on the ground are very well aware of the changes to the climate. เชิญต่อเลยค่ะ
ผลกระทบจากร้อนแล้งนะคะทำให้มะม่วงยืนต้นตายนะคะซึ่งกำลังได้ผลผลิตแล้วทำให้เราต้องลงทุนไปซื้อกิ่งพันธุ์มาปลูกใหม่แล้วอีก 3-5 ปีนะคะถึงจะเริ่มได้ผลผลิตมะม่วงออกดอกช้ากว่าปกติออกไม่สม่ำเสมอทั่วต้นนาข้าวได้ผลผลิตน้อยไม่พอกินในครัวเรือนจากอากาศที่ร้อนทำให้เสียสุขภาพจิตนะคะแล้วก็เครียดทำให้มีผดผื่นขึ้นตามร่างกายนะคะบางครั้งต้องไปหาหมอเสียค่าใช้จ่ายเพิ่มค่าใช้จ่ายค่าน้ำค่าไฟและค่าสุขภาพต้องลงทุนค่าน้ำมันสูบน้ำแล้วก็สายส่งน้ำเพื่อที่จะหาน้ำมาใส่นาข้าวแล้วก็สวนมะม่วงนะคะเป็นการเพิ่มค่าใช้จ่ายที่มากขึ้นนะคะและผลผลิตที่น้อยลงทำให้ได้รับผลกระทบเสียหายเป็นแสนนะคะสำหรับตัวดิฉันเองและถ้ารวมถึงชุมชนหรือเพื่อนๆเกษตรกรทุกคนก็เป็นล้านบาทหรือมากกว่านั้นเลยค่ะไปค่ะ
A very brief impact of the climate-induced heat and drought to her mango trees and rice fields, and together with the other women community. The mango trees standing die, and also she has to invest more to buy seeds and to grow for another 3 to 5 years until she gets the next yield. So that means it's not just only she has to buy the new seeds and invest on that, but she lost also the yields because of the heat and the drought. And also she and the other women in the community are also struggling to find the solutions as well. They had to invest by themselves using their own money to invest on making the last mile connection to the water sources provided by the government, because the women communities do not have access to that last mile water connection. And those kind of the measures and also solutions that she made include having a pond within her farm, and also making the last mile connection and paying for the petrol to pump the water into the farm, and also to buy pipes in order to connect the last mile connection. And these are all the expenses incurred for their struggling on the ground. And if you are looking at the expenses, it's even more than $1 million USD when you are considering the whole community who have to invest by themselves for the solutions that they would like to have in their farm. ต่อเลยค่ะ
จากการช่วยเหลือของรัฐนะคะทำให้เราเข้าไม่ถึงแล้วก็เข้าได้ยากซึ่งมีกฎระเบียบแล้วก็เงื่อนไขต่างๆที่รัฐกำหนดขึ้นมากมายนะคะแล้วก็รวมถึงกองทุนนวัตกรรมหรือแม้แต่กองทุนของโลกร้อนนะคะจากสภาพอากาศที่เปลี่ยนไปเมื่อก่อนและยิ่งจะเพิ่มขึ้นรุนแรงขึ้นเรื่อยๆดิฉันและประชาชนผู้ที่ไม่ได้เป็นคนก่อนะคะแต่เราเป็นผู้ที่ได้รับผลกระทบนี้โดยตรงและเพิ่มขึ้นทุกปีแล้วก็ยิ่งเพิ่มความรุนแรงขึ้นนะคะขอบคุณค่ะ
The very last point is on the measures provided by the government in order to solve droughts and also heat problem. There has been a plan in DC of Thailand, but that plan doesn't address sufficiently the heat problem that women on the ground are facing with. She finds the women community and herself find the very difficult and complicated access to the measures provided by the government, including the resources and also technologies provided. And there have been so many requirements for farmers on the ground in order to access the finance and also the new innovations and new technologies to help solve the drought problem on the ground. She's mentioning about the Green Climate Fund, which she found it quite very challenging and also very difficult to access. So, and for all the work that she has been mentioning, and also all the impacts that has been on women community and herself, she's now doing the policy brief in order to submit to the government in order to voice the concerns from women on the ground, and also to initiate a dialogue with the government so that measures by the government include the voices of the women in the community, and also provide direct access to resources, fund, and also technologies. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Kon Wapiporn and Kon Wanom, for the excellent presentation. We're really grateful that you can, in a sense, put life and experience in the presentations of the previous two economies. So this is a very good, shall we say, interaction and intersection of the Thai presentation with Australia and Iloilo and Philippine presentation. So I would now like to open the floor for questions and comments. Before we go into the panel of reactors, we'll first, are there questions, Patty, or there are none? If there are none, then we can go ahead with Professor Dang An Nguyen for his reaction. And then we will, in the last maybe 30 minutes, we can ask for questions and comments. Okay, so I suppose there are no questions, so we'll proceed first with our first reactor, Professor Dang Nguyen An. I'm very grateful to him. I know he's extremely busy. He is a top sociologist of Vietnam, and he was also a keynote speaker of ours in the APSA 2012 conference. So I am very grateful to you, Anne, for sharing your time and your insights with us. As I said to you this morning, I'm just interested in the Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences knowledge, and I know you're doing many researches there. So thank you very much, Dangan. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Good morning from Vietnam. Thank you, Professor Emma, and the meeting organizers for inviting me to this meeting. I would like to spend about a few minutes talking about the experience of Vietnam, but I have to say that the experience of Thailand and Philippines on climate change and community resilience is very useful for us, because from the four speaker presentation, I found a lot of things relevant for Vietnam. So let me spend some slides for you. Next, please. If we talk about climate change impacts in Vietnam, I have to say that Vietnam is also one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. It ranked number 6 compared to Philippines. It's ranked number 9. I heard from you. And also the climate change now affects about 74% of the populations. That is by the UNDP report. Of course, they are different. The population may include the different groups. So, but the poor are the most affected by the climate shocks. You can find in many areas of Vietnam, especially in the coastal area and cities, the problem of frequent floodings and also rising sea levels and erosion of coastal areas. The loss of land, the loss of assets, as well as the infrastructures by climate impacts. So with the COVID pandemic hit seriously in the south of Vietnam, it also increased the multiple risks, not only poverty, climate change, but also the health, as well as the pandemics and the life of the people. Next, please. If we talk about the equity or inequity under climate change in Vietnam, we found a lot of issues, and I am happy to hear from the speaker about this dimension in our sections. The risk of climate change, of course, we know that it's not spread equally among people in city, in state, in province, and that's easy to recognize. But the most thing we found in all the study is the harming vulnerable groups. They are most affected and facing a lot of the economic and health hardships from climate shocks. We know that that is unfair because they are least responsible for climate change emissions, but they are most affected disproportionately, disproportionately. And the community and the people in Vietnam, especially in the Mekong Delta, are facing climate emergency today. So not only the King people, but also the ethnic group like the Khmer, like the Cham people also affected. And the well-being of the people are seriously impacted by climate change. So I have to say that a lot of study have a look at this. Next, please. And how about the protection of the people under this vulnerability? I think the Vietnamese government is making great efforts with the NGOs in responding to not only to the climate shocks, but also recently to the COVID pandemic, because that's also affect the same area of the Mekong Delta and other part of the southern Vietnam. We support the most vulnerable groups under the both impacts of COVID as well as by climate change. The service we provide include the social security, social protections, and food and housings, and etc. to buffer the impact of the between the impact as well as the resilience in the community. And also we provide the family with a lot of support to better prepare for to withstand for the climate shocks. But I have to say that different model, different areas, and different initiative has been applied in this exercise. Next, please. And I got to say that from your speaking, from your paper today, I found a lot of major and policy innovations. But in Vietnam, we look at the three areas. What we call by integrated response to the climate change. The first one is raising awareness, because not all people understand the impact of climate change and how to build the resilience. We mobilize the family and also the young people, the community, to raise awareness and information provisions to understand the effects of natural disaster. We also use the drama, the plays like the Philippines, the toolkits to raise the awareness. But also at the same time, we have to keep them safe. Safe by what? By doing the modern, like a safe school modern, safe housing model, and the community-based protection system. By community-based protection system, we highlight the three areas. One is to use a human resource, and human resource in the locality. We use resource, financial resource to support and then to implement the plans, and as well as to use the social capital system. That means very much sociological to support each other and to extend the networks on different levels to cope with the climate impacts. And as the last thing is to promote the livelihood. You know, in the Mekong Delta as well as the impact areas, we facilitate the production of paddy rice as well as to raise the stream for export and for consumption. And that works very well for the food security. So far in the area impacted by the climate change, people still have a good food and also have a good livelihoods. The only thing they affect is housing, the COVID pandemics, as well as infrastructures. This is the badly impacted and affected by the climate change. So I found the situation in Thailand as well as in Philippines are very interesting and useful for the Vietnamese partner to learn and to share the experience. So let me stop here because I have only a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor Ann. Professor Ann is our brilliant leader in the Asian Social Wellbeing Consortium. I'm very happy to that you can share some time with us, Professor Ann. Thank you. Next, our speaker is Dr. Brooke Williamson. Dr. Williamson is the senior lecturer at the School of Development Studies in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Globe University, Australia. She's the director of the Master in International Development and convener of the Major in Sustainability and Development. She has been mainly working in China, but is quite also involved in research in West Africa, Southeast Asia, and Australia. Dr. Brooke, can you take the floor? Yeah.
Thank you for that, Professor Emma. First, I want to say congratulations to Professor Emma and to APSA for this wonderful conference. And I want to congratulate Dr. Ravagos, De Fiesta, Dr. C, and Madam Wiponthama on their wonderful presentations and their deep commitment to the collection and analysis of rich empirical data. So these studies, I think, can offer important new information to inform preparation, adaptation, and transformation in relation to climate change. And I really appreciate that Professor Porio's team are really focused on these three tranches of response to climate change. So in listening to the speakers, I was very much thinking about my understanding of climate change from my experiences in doing research in agricultural adaptation in China, looking at social responses in West Africa, and also in my time working with Dr. C on his work in Iloilo. I was struck by how Dr. Ravagos' study looked at the formal and informal households, and how she has demonstrated how we can't approach climate change research in a silo, nor consider it a new and burgeoning area for researchers. So there's a long history of disaster and poverty alleviation studies around the world, particularly in the Philippines. And climate change research really sits at the confluence of all these past studies. So there are multiple entangled drivers, impacts and responses that we need to consider when talking about vulnerability to climate change. And these cannot be identified as purely a result of or a response to something that is particularly just climate change. So we need to build on all this past work and learn from it and engage with it. Dr. De Fiesta's fabulous study of social vulnerability highlights the entangled attributes that contribute to social vulnerability. And when I was listening to Dr. Fiesta speak, I was wondering about how social vulnerability is produced. What are the historical, political, and institutional drivers of all of these characteristics of social vulnerability? Does dependency, for example, which was one of the attributes that Dr. De Fiesta's study looked at, does it have deep historical roots in colonialism in the Philippines? And are these vulnerabilities then reproduced through contemporary political and institutional inequalities and biases? And finally, Dr. C's work that I'm very, before I get to, we'll go to Dr. C's work now. He highlights the highly political nature of climate change adaptation, and he gives us the hopeful example of the Homeless People's Federation of the Philippines. And we can see here how this organisation created spaces for political capability through voice, participation and empowerment, through which people engaged with the resettlement. And it made me wonder how people can work with the political and climate change rather than against it, or to self-determine their climate futures. And this is something that I know Dr. C is very passionate about, looking at the politics of climate adaptation. And finally, I get to Madam Wipon Tharma's description of the lived experience of climate change. And I think this is something that is so missing in international forums like this. And so I congratulate Professor Porio, Madam Wipon Tharma and the Climate Watch Thailand for bringing this important voice to the fore in a meeting like this. And she spoke about how the rhythm of life has already been interrupted, and this has flow-on effects into her private sphere. Madam Tharma's reflections on the Thai minister at COP26 highlights how local level understanding and knowledges are missing as important sources of expertise. And there is a lack of engagement between the upper echelons of politics among people who make the decisions that have significant impacts on the ground. Tharma must live the impacts of decisions made at Glasgow, but is disregarded as a source of knowledge and dismissed as unaware of the impacts. Here we see Madam Tharma's extraordinary attempts to adapt every day. So once again, I congratulate Madam Tharma for her willingness to share her deep knowledge and expertise in this international forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brooke. I'd like to say thank you very much for guiding Justine very well and coming up with the excellent study. And I really appreciate all your, co-authorships of all these articles. Thank you very much. I hope we can work more together in the coming years. So next, thank you. I would like to call on Professor Koichi Hasegawa of Tohoku University, Japan. Thank you very much, Professor Koichi, for coming and joining with us. Professor Koichi and I have a long, working together in the International Sociological Association and also in the Division for Environment and Society. Professor Hasegawa is Professor of Sociology in the Graduate School of Art and Letters of Tohoku University. And his recent most concern is the sociological analysis of transitional process of energy and environmental policy with collaborative process among authorities, citizens groups, NGOs, NPOs, and private enterprise. That's good, Professor Hasegawa, because Dr. Maharabago has been working on energies with the Congress of the Philippines and things like that. So you have a lot to say. So Professor Koichi, take the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. I really appreciate Emma and your colleagues to lead this 16th APSA conference very successful. And first, I would like to introduce Japanese situation related to today's presentation.
You can share screen if you want.
Yeah. Okay. Can you
can you maximize it, Patty? Or
yeah. Can you look at my slides?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. First, I would like to the situation of Asia Pacific areas. Yeah. I will show the major big natural disasters in these 25 years. Yeah. From the Great Hanshin Awaji earthquake in 1995, and in Philippines, we have a very strong image, and the damages Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, 8 years ago, and 2018 in Japan, very strong floods happened. At that time, unfortunately, more than 250 victims within several days, very big rainfall. So we are realizing climate crisis is already a reality, even in Japan. So, as you know, Japan and Philippines and other Asia Pacific area is a very high risk in the quake-prone areas. Especially Japan is one of the present mobile belts with the highest activity on the globe. So our sociologists in Asia Pacific area, we should raise the voices to extend the definition of sustainability. As you know, traditional definition of sustainability is related to future generations, related within our generation, relationship between developing countries and developed countries. Yeah, South and North relationships, and also related to natural limits. But I think we should raise the voice. New dimension should be included, related to resilient community or local resilience, especially vulnerability. So I really appreciate today's Justin's first presentation. He is really focusing on adaptation and vulnerable group. And I agree his conclusion, the strong combination of voice and participation and empowerment. Also, 3/11 disaster in Japan, tsunami disaster, and Fukushima nuclear disaster, we are also finding raising voice and involvement in total participation process and also empowerment. But I want to ask to Justin, how about in your study, the effect of gender differences, gender gap, and differences of generation? Generation gap. And also, I would like to thank you, Mahat's presentation today. Japan is also very extremely weather events prone country, especially in recent several years. And I'm very interested in her study, the contrast of formal sector and informal sector. Formal household and informal household. And also, I'm very interested in today's Gay's presentation, especially in how she is focusing in the situation of barangays. Very special situation of Philippines. Yeah, and in Japan, I'm reflecting on the 3/11 tsunami disaster and Fukushima nuclear disaster. We should describe and analyze first, who are victims, what are major damages, and second, who are responsible for. Yeah. In natural disaster, traditionally, none are responsible. But in recent situation, we should analyze, especially in Fukushima nuclear case, who are major perpetrators and causal factors, and mechanism, structure, and historical background, and who are protesting, outline strategies, targets, and support base. In case of protest movement, and how we should respond from policy making. For example, in case of nuclear and coal-fired power plant, Germany is a leading country. So in case of Japan, unfortunately, weak political leadership and centralized ineffective regulation and authority system, weak and small NGOs, no Green Party, weak voices from civil society, but strong voices from economic sector, Japanese Keidanren, and a close relationship between a ruling party, LDP, and economic sector. So, Germany, after Fukushima nuclear accident, Germany is pushing policy change and forwarded climate actions. In my city, myself is committing a legal protest to coal-fired plant. But such a legal protest is very difficult in Japanese situation. But this flag said no coal-fired plant in Sendai port. Anyway, yeah, let's raise our strong voices from the Asia Pacific region to forward climate action and analyze vulnerability and adaptation. Yeah. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Koichi. Now may I call on Miss Antonia Yololo Izaga, my partner, a long time in Coastal Cities at Risk. She used to be the executive director of the Manila Observatory, and now she's leading us there as president of the National Resilience Council. Tony?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ems, and thank you to the speakers and the reactors so far for these very interesting and insightful presentations and reactions. I'd like to start by saying that I feel a little bit out of water here, not being an academic and being mostly in the practitioner area at this point. I feel that perhaps maybe a perspective from the practitioner and particularly in engagement of the private sector in climate resilience, if I may contribute in a small measure to the great information that has already been shared with us by the academic work that has been done and the research work that's been done. My first comment would be towards Justine's presentation, and the central message that was driven home by that presentation was climate resilience and disaster resilience is a negotiation And that negotiation is often biased in favor of those that in fact have the voice, are able to participate more actively, and that are empowered by the knowledge and skills and expertise that they are able to access. And so that negotiation is a continuous process. As risk continues to evolve, these power relationships, given the meta capabilities that Justin has mentioned, also are dynamic. And so the processes continue. It's very important to recognize that these three capabilities are in fact part of transformation in terms of vulnerability. In this respect, in terms of his study, in terms of vulnerability because of the lack of safe housing and the access to the kind of resources that are needed in order to maintain a quality of life. And the role that, in fact, participation and knowledge had played in providing that voice to the communities that were successful in doing so. The second presentation from Dr. Ravagos really brought home the point that informal and formal incomes are part of the social and the physical intersection of the geographies of risk in the country, and how, in fact, targeted social protection needs to be crafted in order to address the specific context of income-related poverty in the country and the impact of extreme weather events on these. Where that led, in fact, quite naturally, is towards asking the question, what is the role of rural to urban migration in terms of establishing who in the city is in fact going to become informal, who in the city is going to be part of the urban poor, whether you are part of the formal poor or the invisible poor in the city. And so I do feel that there's a lot of work that can continue to be done in understanding informality and vulnerability, not just based on incomes. And hopefully that becomes an area of study that can be pursued given the work that has already been done by Dr. Ravagos. In Doc Gay's presentation, and this I find extremely critical, unpacking vulnerability is the key towards transformation and resilience. And without this unpacking, private sector, other parties, national government will not be able to, in fact, target the kind of interventions and design the kind of interventions, whether they be on the policy or on the practice level, in order to, in fact, decrease that vulnerability. The second point here is, I think, a point that Doc Emma and I continuously talk about is the intersectionality of vulnerability, and how the intersectionality of the different dimensions of vulnerability actually provide the foundation. Understanding that intersectionality provides the foundation for a multi-pronged, multi-dimensional approach as well to understanding it, and then to actually providing some measure of integration in terms of the approach to providing solutions at the end of the day. We need to understand that as we unpack that there in fact are these intersections between the different dimensions of vulnerability. And that message was brought home quite clearly to me through Doc Gay's presentation and through the presentation of Madame Wapiporn. Addressing this on a daily basis, the intersectionality, and trying to address it at the practice level as well as at the, hopefully at some point, policy level, would be the real challenge, I think, that we're faced with. From the perspective of the private sector, and that's what I've been asked to comment on, I'd like to say that there are new pathways towards engaging the private sector in negotiating resilience within the city and of course at the national level. And I'd like to point out that there are developments in the regulatory environment, in the environment that involves disclosures by private corporations that can in fact provide entry points towards negotiating this resilience more effectively. And I wish to point out here the movement towards environmental, social, and governance standards that are now being articulated and developed in terms of the reporting of private corporations to their stakeholders and to the different global publics. Environmental, social, and governance standards include impacts on the environment, impacts on the communities, impacts on the different rights that should be associated with those that are within the sphere of influence, if you will, by corporations. And here's an opportunity for us to actually learn and understand more from each other. I think that by looking at ESG very carefully in terms of the way it's going to be articulated and defined in the reporting on the ethical standards that should govern the private sector, as well as the sustainability and resilience standards that are going to define private corporations. There are opportunities for this negotiated resilience with the of the different vulnerabilities and how they intersect with each other to be part of that discussion. And I think academia has a very critical role to play here in engaging both the private sector as well as the rest of the community in articulating what should be involved in these standards of ethical behavior and sustainability of the private sector. And I think I'll end there because as Emma knows, and those of us like Dr. Gay and Jessica who are part of the Coastal Cities at Risk project, we have stressed the need to own and co-own the risk that we face. And here's where the vulnerability analysis really could support. In fact, this whole issue of equity, accountability, and transparency. And by owning, co-owning, and co-generating solutions made possible through exchanges such as this morning, I think that would be the only way forward in terms of negotiating resilience for all, rather than just being biased towards some. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you very much. Remember our proposal to IDRC in 2017, wherein we emphasized negotiated resilience as a concept. So I'm glad, Justine, Professor Koichi, and all the others have brought that into the surface again. So thank you, Tony. I would like to call on Jessica, because during the time wherein we were calling for questions from the audience, we didn't see Jessica's comments and question. I'd like to call on Jessica to read his question and comments, and after that, I would like Kun Wanun to basically read his response as well to Jessica's comments in the chat box. Jessica?
Yeah, thank you very much, for all the presentations and all the reflections that were also shared by our actors. I find the presentation of Kun Wapiporn and Kun Wanun deeply moving because it is a powerful example of equity at this point in time. Now, very fitting for this session because it gave space to those who are really vulnerable and those who were previously voiceless to articulate their own issues, intent, and aspirations. It is also an example, I think, of what Dr. C referred to as procedural justice. My question for Kun Wapiporn and Kun Wanun are what did they, how did they find the courage, particularly for Kun Wapiporn? Where did they find, and how did they find the courage to speak to government and other decision makers? Did they receive some capacity building support? And what was the main driver for Dr. C? Having heard the exchanges, is there any concrete measure that you will recommend to ensure inclusion in decision making so we are able to achieve procedural justice? So those are my comments and questions, Dr. Emma.
Before Dr. C responds to the to your question, Jack, I'd like Kun Wanom to please, she responded there to your question in the chat. Kun Wanom, can you please unmute yourself and just read what you know, in the interest of time,
Sure. Kun Vapipon sent me the Thai note, so I translated
Yes,
in the chat box. Yeah, so I'm reading it. Yeah, thank you very much. Kun Vapipon and the women community, together with the NGOs, started with understanding the issues of climate change and climate justice, looking at the changes to the climate patterns from the local and from their experiences, collecting and analyzing impacts on the resources and livelihoods, and also investigating on different measures and how those measures are responding to women's needs and concerns. All women in the community have their own climate story to speak, and this is their own story of climate impacts and how and if measures are responding to our needs. These are real stories, and we use these to form our policy ask to the government and the need for NDC to listen to women's voices. In terms of the support, we have limited support on advancing our understanding on climate projections, but women community try to collaborate with different NGOs who also help amplify the voices both at national and regional levels. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. With your permission, I would like to read the question of Hadassah Espiridion from Visayas State University, Philippines. He says, hi to all speakers today for climate, equity, climate change, equity, and community resilience. I have a general question. People nowadays strive to accumulate material goods, and in return, industries cater to these needs. Unfortunately, the overproduction of consumption goods causes skyrocketing effects in our environment. Concerned authorities, civil groups, and individuals raise awareness on protecting the environment. But it is also ironic that these people do not walk their talk. How can ordinary people truly achieve behavioral change in terms of protecting the environment that will ultimately mitigate climate change? If these contradicting practices and advices continue, what is the point? This is the whole point that he wants to communicate. Is anyone from the speakers and panelists would respond to that question of Professor Hassanuddin from Visayas State University?
Professor Emma, can I just respond to Ms. Jessica's question quickly?
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry, I forgot about that. Okay. Sorry.
That's okay, Doc Emma. So I just want to say thank you to Ms. Jack for this very important question. It's a difficult question because there's really no concrete measure or way how that we can achieve procedural justice. The three meta capabilities that I mentioned this morning, they are necessary to ensure inclusion, but inclusion is one thing. Having the ability to influence decision-making is another. So as I said, participation is always talked about, but meaningful participation is very difficult to achieve in practice. So I guess we can learn from Homeless People's Federation. First, they have placed vulnerable groups at the center of their practice. They've capacitated them, trained them, so that they will have the skills and confidence that they need to engage with powerful stakeholders like the government. And second, most importantly of all, is to forge productive relationships with different stakeholders. Just like what Coastal City-Centric Risk Project Dr. Porio told us a while ago. There should be opportunities for sharing, for exchange, for collaborating with the government, the private sector, civil society, and academia. So it's a combination of all these strategies that can really help ensure inclusion in decision-making. So, thank you.
Thank you, Justine. Thank you. In fact, I always told my colleagues in academia and also the colleagues in our partners, I always say to innovate is to collaborate. But to collaborate is to navigate the systems and the people that we work with I also think that, negotiated resilience, the concept of negotiated resilience that Tony brought about, it's really by bringing the voice, the participation, the involvement of the people, there has to be mutual respect and recognition of the other. I think a lot of us come with very busy and strong positioning, and oftentimes we cannot look at the others in terms of from the perspective. So I hope what we really want to emphasize in APSA is the sharing of experiences, the sharing of our science and application and our successes and failures, because that's part of life. So thank you very much. Can I call on now? I have Lamberto Pilatan have also a question. He basically congratulated the Iloilo City team, Dr. C and Dr. De Fiesta and also Dr. Rabago for highlighting really good models of disaster preparedness and resilience. And then I think Professor Koichi was asked by Godfrey Mordino. Godfrey Mordino, I think, basically asked the questions of, I'm trying to look, can you unmute Godfrey Patti? I'm looking for his question. He had a long question earlier. Godfrey, are you there? Can you pose a question to that? Already, Koichi has already answered you, but I just want you to articulate your question.
Yes. Good morning to everybody, especially to the panelists. Thank you very much for entertaining this question. I was just reflecting on the input of Professor Koichi Hasegawa, and I just added on his explanation on the need to extend the definition of sustainability, and I was pointing out that there should also be a reconceptualization that a sustainability framework should include also human-induced disaster. I cited the example of Marawi siege, which took place in the southern Philippines back in 2017, which brought about massive displacement, and which is until now prolonged by the slow-paced rehabilitation of the city. And after 23 May 2017, after 4 months, Typhoon Tambin came and ravaged the entire region and created double displacement among the internally displaced persons of the Marawi siege. However, the problematic is exacerbated by the thrust of the national government to finish first the tourism complex, instead of providing a comprehensive housing plan for the entire population. So my question is for Professor Koichi is, what policy framework should guide us in terms of responding to these interfacing vulnerabilities brought about by man-made disasters and natural disasters, and what should be done in terms of sustainability and specifically the role of the vulnerable communities. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Professor Koichi, can you respond, and perhaps also your last comments, because we have, we're running out of time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Godfrey, yeah, very wonderful 2 questions to me. To the second question, what should be done for our sociologists? Yeah, I agree. Recently, the interfacing vulnerability just you referred man-made and natural disasters. Like a strong rainfall today, it's not simple natural disaster. In many cases, such strong rainfall may be the effect of human factors, the effect of CO2 emissions, improving our CO2 emissions. So the last Friday, just last Friday, we found in Glasgow, COP26, the world agreed, updated Paris Agreement, focusing on 1 degree. In many natural disasters, the delay of information by a local government, national government, and also the delay of providing such a household to compensate to local peoples lost their houses, etc. Also in Japan, in the case of Fukushima nuclear disaster, Japanese national government and Fukushima prefecture, they wanted to appeal to the world early return to the original houses, and Fukushima nuclear disaster was already over, to welcome world people to the Tokyo Olympic game. Yeah, such a government and economic sector want to appeal such a tourist and the effect of economic factors. So I want to stress the role of our sociologists. Like today's Justin, Maha, and Gay's presentation, we should analyze several factors to affect vulnerabilities and resilience, and paying attention to local voices. Such a accumulation of basic data on resilience vulnerability and local community, vulnerable communities, yeah, such a accommodation will be making power to local voices, I believe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are on the last 4 minutes of our Q&A. So I would like to call on the panelists to say their last pieces. I have an 11 o'clock meeting, so I'm sorry that, we really have to end on time. So who would like to go first? Would Maha or Maha,
Yes.
would you like to go first? Then
Yeah, okay.
I'll call on, Gay and Justine and, okay? Yeah.
Yes, in response to the question of the one from BSU, with regards to the environmental concerns, and how do we change the behavior of the people? Yes, I agree with you that we really need to have that awareness, educational campaign with regards to changing behavior. But keeping in mind the perspective of a developing country like the Philippines, where poverty is still very high at 16% in the last official estimates in 2018, and this is likely to have increased given the pandemic. So the poor people who are likely to be living in marginal areas, and their primary concern is where to get their meal or their second or third meal for the day, and they are mostly living in marginal areas where hunger could actually push them to degrade the environment. Keep in mind that environmental concerns is related to intergenerational behavioral change. So mostly concerns for the environment, we will see this in households that are in the middle or higher income, and this is established in the literature with the environmental Kuznets curves, where concerns for the environment is very high among the middle and high income households. And this is also shown in the survey that the NEDA conducted in relation to Ambition Natin 2040. They had a question related to environmental concerns, and this clearly shows among the households in the middle and high income households. So to really take into account the concerns for the environment, we really should be addressing first the primary development goal, which is lifting people out of poverty. And in the Philippines, it's still very high. And you cannot tell these people who are living in poverty to be mindful of the environment when in fact their concern is where to get their third or second meal for the day. So I think that would be my answer to that. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Pollo.
you very much, Dr. Rabago. Can we call on Dr. De Fiesta, please, to say your last words of wisdom?
Okay. I would like to highlight equitable resilience in this last message. This is very much related to social vulnerability and equity and resilience, and probably also answering the question of what policy framework should we have to address that interfacing vulnerabilities. Equitable resilience is basically inclusive resilience. And it is highly likely when resilience practice takes into account social vulnerabilities, context, both historical, political, and the differential access to power, knowledge, and resources. It is only with equitable resilience that we are able to achieve sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call on Dr. C to give his last words of wisdom to us. Being fresh from the PhD, what can you tell us old people?
Thank you very much, Dr. Pollo. I would like to highlight, in closing, I would like to highlight Ma'am Tony's comment that disaster resilience, the act of building resilience is a negotiation. I just wanted to stress that negotiation is a two-way process. It's not one side imposing on the other. But to do this, there is work to do. As Ma'am Tony said, there is power imbalance. I'm not sure if we can balance the scale, but we still have to do our best nevertheless. We have to build resilience in spite of politics, of injustices, of inequalities in our community. But I'd like to end in a hopeful tone. that there is hope. And you can see this in the experience of homeless people's federations. I'd like to stress that no one owns the only solution to this climate crisis. There are multiple diverse pathways to climate change adaptation, and we can only bring this out if we engage in productive negotiation and collaboration with multiple stakeholders. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I call on Dr. Professor An from Vietnam before he goes to his office in Vietnam Academic Social Sciences? Are you here, Dr. An? Can you see your last words? Or is he gone? Joy? Hello, Joy. Okay.
I'm checking. I think he has left.
If Professor An
is still here.
Okay, Professor An, can you please say your last words and can you highlight her? I mean, highlight him. Professor An, if he's not ready, can we call on Professor Brooke to give his was before, the last one will be the Thai Konwapon and Konwapon. Brooke, would you have any last words of wisdom for us in all our work?
I'm so impressed with the work that's being done at Ateneo University. I suppose the only last comment I have is really what I've learned from working with Dr. Justin C. And that's really that climate change adaptation is a political process, and that we need to learn how to think and work politically when we're advising technically, and that there needs to be social uptake. So we need to also be allowing those who are affected by these interventions to also think and work politically to engage in the change process that is their climate change futures. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to call on Tony to give his last few words before we close this session.
Thank you, Emma. Again, I'm very encouraged on the sending a note to Justin. I think that there are great opportunities here for dialogue. And I know that there are obstacles. I know that there are parties who are not open to constructive dialogue, but we need to pursue this. And that's the reason why the National Resilience Council is continuing to engage with academia, with the private sector, with the CSO sector, and local and national government. It is a negotiation. And as I said earlier, as we negotiate, risk also continues to change. And so we cannot stop that process. We need to continue with this commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Now I'd like to call on Napiporn and Konwapon, please, to say your last words of wisdom to us, given your extensive experience and excellent insights.
ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะผลกระทบโลกร้อนที่เกิดขึ้นนะคะจริงๆเป็นเรื่องความเป็นความตายของผู้หญิงหรือของเกษตรกรและของประชาชนผู้ทำนโยบายต่างๆต้องฟังเสียงเหล่านี้แล้วก็การทำมาตรการต่างๆนะคะต้องตอบสนองต่อความต้องการของชุมชนและต้องมีการติดตามตรวจสอบและรายงานความคืบหน้าต่างๆให้กับชุมชนรับรู้ด้วยค่ะขอบคุณมาก
I'll do the translation.
Yeah, please be quick because we have 3 minutes left.
Impacts of climate change are the matter of life and death for farmers, women, and also for the older generation of the peoples. And those who've been in the policy making process and those in the policy level needs to listen to all the voices on the ground and our voices. Measures to be implemented must include all the voices and also needs of these women and also local communities. We have to hold the government accountable to their all actions and measures to be implemented. Thank you.
Oh, great, Wanon. That's a great translation, great message from the Thai group. If Professor An is here, I'd like to hear at least 2 sentences, and then we go on Puichi, and then we close. Is Professor Ann here? If not, we ask Professor Koichi to say his last few words?
Okay.
Okay.
In the introduction by Emma this morning, she introduced her sector, her center's activities. Especially, I realize the importance of risk visualization and community resilience kit. Yeah. Our role of sociologists is just sociological analysis, like today's Justin, Maha, and Gay's presentation. And such a sociological analyze bring risk visualization and visualization for local people, the relationship, what factors related to vulnerability and resilience, and how to strong our local voices. So I really appreciate Emma and her colleagues' very long year effort to such visualization of social factors. And also thank you to local voice from Thailand. Yeah, I know a lot of things, very difficult situation in lower northern Thailand, especially women's.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Koichi, and I really would appreciate, that all the speakers, Dr. C, Dr. Rabago, Dr. De Fiesta, and all the and Kun Riporn and Kun Wapon, and the panel of reactors, Dr. Brook, Tony, Koichi, and Professor Ann. I really am appreciative. I mean, this is the kind of conversation we'd like to have, but also in the interest of time, and also in the interest that we always keep our webinars, short, or at least not so long, because of the Zoom stress that it gives to our eyes. But really, I'd like to thank everyone. And in fact, what I'd like to say is that these kinds of conversation lead us to think of other things that we should be going. So I am very happy that everyone really tells him about the contribution that they could do in order to crafting a sustainable, resilient future, what kinds of concepts, what kinds of methodological and analytical trajectories that we should have. And in fact, because of yesterday's discussion, Professor Abaya and Professor Mewako were talking about getting a forum in January on syndemic patterns and climate change. And also, I have also talked to the ISA about, perhaps somewhere in the middle of this next year, APSA will, with ISA, will do a research and publication workshop. And it's really to bring together Asia Pacific, sociological, and especially I was telling the APSA officers, I said, we are old. We have to create a new generation of social scientists, physical scientists that are engaged together. And that's why I was thanking Brooke earlier for doing a wonderful job with Justine. And Also, Tony, has been encouraging young people. I really think that we have to create a new generation, a new breed of social and physical scientists that works together with professionals, practitioners on the ground, and really willing to test how to test our ideas, to test our findings. How does it work? And gives us more, shall we say, permutations, more possibilities. Okay, so thank you very much.